This podcast is sponsored by UnCanna, Trusted Natural Solutions. UnCanna is a leading voice of advocacy for CBD in the veteran, LEO, and federal communities. Veteran-owned and operated, the UnCanna team is actively fighting for DoD access to CBD with political pressure, community support, and a simple message. #OpNatural. UnCanna is vertically integrated with industry leaders from seed to sell, supplying premium, small batch products to America's best. Use code MENTORS4MIL at checkout at UnCanna.com to receive your amazing discount. Read the Mentors for Military disclaimer at mentorsformilitary.com/disclaimer. All right, so Blaze, I want to go back to a conversation that we had a couple of weeks ago regarding our childhoods, because I think we started talking about something very similar. And, I grew up with a military father. I don't know if that had anything to do with it, but it was a very disciplined time frame. I can tell you that. If you were to even say, yeah, you almost got a slap on the back of the head because yeah wasn't the appropriate response. It was supposed to be yes, sir. And so I think it started instilling in me as well kind of this whole thing about being driven and, being the best at everything you did. And, if you quit something, quitting wasn't an option, with him. It was, you're a failure. You need to do better and those types of things. And it was a long time after that I was an adult where I really started coming into understanding why I was the way I was. And that was something you and I were talking about at that time frame. So you grew up in St. Pete. I don't know if you mentioned whether or not you came up in a military family or not.
Yeah, so my grandparents actually raised me.
Okay.
And Robert, hey, first off, thanks again for allowing me to be on the show, the cast. It's interesting. A couple weeks ago when we started this conversation, it was just like it was digging stuff up. And even after I got on the phone with you, I kind of just paused and thought for a second, right? And you were like, no, we don't get into too much, but
yeah.
I am, this will be, I think it'll just be good to connect today and sharing the conversation, and I love the topic of being driven, right? Where does that come from? Where does that source come from? But yeah, as far as my family, my grandfather, I grew up with actually my uncle in the house, and then also my grandfather and my grandmother, and he was in the Marine Corps. He actually didn't even finish his first enlistment, but he never stopped being a Marine. I'll just say that, right?
Oh, yeah.
That was just always his attitude, and it really was. I think it was a fraction or a big time lens that defined how we thought, but much of it was old time values that he had anyway, right, from his own dad.
Yeah.
And a very, very structured, disciplined home, and through it's kind of interesting as I grew older and as I became a dad and a husband and kind of reflected on the things that I saw growing up. I started to process things a little bit differently too, but yeah, absolutely, it was very, very high expectations. It was expectations that I could never touch. And it really did, I think, in a way, when I came in the military myself, I was trying to probably not do it for me, but I was trying to prove something to them.
Yeah.
But yeah.
That's exactly what happened to me. And then we started going down the conversation on, because it was probably a time frame where I think I hit my lowest low in terms of I was checking out, really climbing the corporate ladder. At that time frame, I was an executive in a Fortune 50 company with a lot of stress and a lot of pressure. And I was driven at that time frame to, my goals at that time were to be an executive vice president, to be a CEO one day, or, at least that's some of the things that I had thought. And, I started hitting some lows there and didn't realize I had lost my passion and my purpose, and I was being driven towards the wrong things in my life, So, and I've shared this in other podcast shows that after I left, my son-in-law was in the car with me, and we just had a general casual conversation. He goes, "It's good to have you back." And I go, "What do you mean?" He goes, "You've been gone for a while." And, that's where I understood that driven can be a good thing, but yet driven can also be a really bad thing. And especially like we're talking about here, if you have the ability to influence others, whether you're in a leadership role or you're a parent, you could be driving people in maybe a way that's not going to be healthy in the long term.
Yeah, big time. And it's crazy how life works, right? Like you wish you knew that when you were younger.
Yeah.
Like the things that you're driven and chasing and the things you think will prove something. But the thing you're after, and I share that with you too, is there's no greater satisfaction to know that you made a difference for somebody else. There just isn't.
Yeah.
And I have the pleasure in the job I'm serving in now, where we have all our brand new recruits coming in the Air Force. So here at Lackland, we have it's the only enlisted accession spot for the Air Force. And a lot of times they'll see me in my position and they say, "Hey, how do I get to be you?" And I tell them, "Hey, I've got all the stripes. I've got a lot of awards, but I can tell you, what I would tell you is any place that you're asked to serve, just make a difference to that team that you're in." And you can fast forward the clock 20 years, and the thing that's going to matter to you is not the stripes on your sleeve or the awards in your cabinet. It's when they give you a phone call or when they send you an email 20 years later and tell you, those times, those memories meant the world to me. Like there's nothing that will bring you greater satisfaction.
Totally.
I wish I knew that, back then. It's not that I necessarily have regrets of how I acted or anything back then, but just I think for what I was searching for and trying to prove something to somebody else or try to prove that I was worth something, because I still had questions, back then about that, because I didn't get those positive strokes growing up.
Yeah.
I just didn't. So
yeah.
But now I just try to share that whenever I can, with our up and comers.
Yeah, I try to do the same thing. But when we're young, we don't really pay attention to that kind of stuff, right? Because that's the old that's the old man talking,
somebody was definitely telling me that, and I probably just blocked them out.
Yeah, if you're in the military, it's like, back in the day they used to call us a lifer or whatever. You're just a lifer. You're stuck in this. Hey, that's not me. Whatever. But you can see it because we've been down this path. We can actually see it in others, and we're trying to let them know that you got to slow down, smell the roses, make sure you're putting the right things in the priority, And in my case, even when I was in the military, I aspired to be the command sergeant major of the Army. Not command sergeant major of the Army, but a command sergeant major or a sergeant major of the Army. And so it was one of these things where I started realizing later in life that I had put a label on something all along my journey that I felt like I would have achieved something at that point, not realizing that when I reached that point, I just reset again. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't necessarily a healthy thing because I wasn't living in the moment. And you're shaking your head.
It's crazy, right? You're exactly, because you're driven by the things in your past, or you're chasing something in the future, and when you're in that space, you're not present on where you're at right now.
Yeah,
you're exactly right.
Yeah.
And it is right. It's right. Is after the promotion ceremony, you're immediately like, okay, what's next?
Yep.
What's the next? Like it's okay. But you don't realize inside you that's not actually what you were built to do.
But it was that early seed that was planted, obviously, between the two of us. And it was one of the things that we connected on because somebody in our lives planted a seed that they thought was actually going to be productive in our lives. So, that kind of never quit, the driven attitude and the whole things. And it wasn't that they were wrong, because it was probably passed on to them, like you said, maybe from their forefathers, and stuff passed on from generation to generation to be the best. But though the approach maybe, and that there wasn't a follow through in conversation, a communication that really said, what I'm trying to say is it's okay to want to be something or want to go in a certain direction, but you also have to understand that you've got to enjoy the moments and everything that are around along the way, because what's the saying? It's not about the it's not about it's about the journey, not the destination, I think is the
Oh yeah,
saying.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
It's hanging in my garage. No
Is
kidding.
it?
It
Okay.
takes that.
Yeah. So, I mean, but nobody said that, right? You had to read about it later on a poster, and then you go, oh, shit, okay, yeah, if I had known that, but
Yeah,
we do something like,
success is a journey, not a destination.
yeah,
And I tried to translate that actually into the pursuit is greater than the arrival,
mm,
right? Like so, and you don't necessarily realize that. Like, and I've heard somebody else talk about it where they'd rather push a boulder up a mountain. Like I think there's like I forget who the Greek like the analogy is, but he's cursed to push a boulder up the mountain over and over and over again for eternity. And it's actually Jocko Willink talks about it, and he's like, yeah, I'd rather do that than get to the top of the mountain and then just sit there and stand there. He's like, I just push the boulder right back down and keep working. Like that's what I'd rather have.
yeah.
And it's funny how that works.
But it's funny that I don't know about you, but looking back on it in retrospect, I felt like that's what I was constantly doing is pushing that boulder up a mountain, not being satisfied, and then looking around and going, oh, okay, there's a bigger mountain over there. Let me take the boulder over there and do that again. And not realizing that when you reach the top, you sit there and you look around and there's nothing else. You've got to be content with that though, right? You've got to be content that, okay, I'm where I said I wanted to be, and I'm okay with that. And now I need to enjoy the moment and take in the air, the scenery, the whole thing. But instead, I was at least the type of person I would look around and go, hey, there's another mountain over there.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can conquer that one,
Yeah. And I think the difference is when you learn that the real test, especially in leadership, is to bring others with you, is to not do it in isolation. Because if you're not careful, yeah, you'll be running around, pushing to this and that, but you lose a connection or paying attention to what even the needs of your team are. Maybe it is time to take a knee as a team, or maybe it is time to push, up the next hill. But especially in the task of leadership, you need to be very, very sensitive to that because you can break your team, you can lose your team, you can lose credibility in a second, and it does spotlight that, hey, it was about you the whole time. So I think like that's that's where the fulfillment comes anyway, is
Right.
when you start to see the team's success, when you start to see that other people may learn from some example that you had. I think that's the real top of the mountain anyway.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily where you ended up. It was how did the environment that you were in, how did you help them in any way? How did they benefit from you having some influence on them?
Yeah. For me, I think it was growing up, I didn't have the type of father that would really acknowledge a success anyway. It was.
Yeah, that was the same for me.
Yeah. So that was a bit of a challenge. And so I think for me, even though I was pushing that rock up that mountain and trying to then look for the next mountain to push it up, along the way, I realized that I needed to at least, from a leadership, from whatever a mentor is to let these other people know, hey, you're good at what you're doing. Continue doing what you've been doing and stuff. Appreciate everything you do on a daily basis, and really lift them up. And started seeing that, like you're mentioning, the greatest reward was watching those individuals grow and achieving success. They pin on sergeant, or then next thing you know, they're becoming a platoon sergeant, or they're becoming a first sergeant, or whatever in their own life. And I took a lot of pride in that, not because I helped them get there, but I felt like there must have been something that I did right during that time frame in talking with them and mentoring them and leading them. Because to your point, many of them still communicate with me on a daily basis today.
Yep.
And it's 20, 30 years ago. And it's crazy when you start thinking about that. But why didn't I, and maybe it's you too, but why didn't we see that although we were doing those things right, the other part was that we're constantly still having that driving mentality. Although we're planting a seed, and a good seed with these individuals, maybe I wonder if I left a little bit of the bad side of being driven too much too. Or did they just look at me and go, hey, that's Robert. I'll let him keep going, but I'm okay. I don't know. I've never asked him, but it might be a good thing to ask him.
Yeah, I'm with you with the negative aspects, right? Like, especially when you talked about, hey, Dad, it's good to have you back.
Yeah.
That's something to where I wish I had known more, that I wouldn't get that time back, that you talk about, right? Like, and that is the cost of service sometimes, but there's a lot of times where it's not the military that's keeping me at work,
Mm.
or it's just I'm just trying to get the things done on my to-do list. I'm just trying to, like, I see that somebody needs help, and I feel like I've just got to be there for them. And I think in a way maybe that's because I did like it when somebody would say, hey, that made a difference to me. But I just, the painful thing that I just didn't realize at the time was there were other sergeants in the Air Force that could have done that.
Yeah.
There's only one dad for my kids.
Yeah.
There's only one. I'm the only, husband to my wife, and at least, um, that doesn't always hold true though, right? Like you see plenty of cases in other military families where that doesn't hold true, where the family just kind of gets tired of not being felt like they're number one. And I'm very, very thankful that actually it's interesting. I got put on a staff assignment, a staff job, before I kind of woke up to it. And at first I was kind of frustrated, right? Because I was like, hey man, no, you guys aren't moving fast enough. Like, we're supposed to be getting stuff done, and like, because the pace of staff work is just different
Yeah.
than frontline ops. But then I had to kind of face the music on, like, man, okay, I have not dated my spouse, just created, even though it's not the volume of time with my kids, I just didn't necessarily block and make them the priority. And I think it was because I was so driven. And it wasn't necessarily, I thought, for, negative means. I thought that was taking care of my family. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
had told myself that. I had told myself that I'm doing this, and I generally was. I thought, like, the better that I do on the military side, like, it's for them. I'll provide more for them. Um, but yeah, I try to share that as much as I can too. That you got to be able to still create the moments, like you said, with them. And there's a pretty cool story actually with my daughter. And I was it was in a job where I was on the road about 200 days a year, and I had heard the Secretary of the Air Force, actually, she spoke about this, about creating moments, even though you won't have a ton of them. So I on the way back, I got a ticket, a couple tickets to my daughter's favorite artist. It was an 8-hour drive, so I landed in Virginia. I was supposed to get back the night before, but then the connecting flight got delayed to the next morning. So then it's a mad dash. I pull her out of school. It's on a Friday. We drive up to Philadelphia. We barely make the concert, and then and then phenomenal night. I get lost in Philadelphia, and we're in this big giant roundabout, and then my daughter like jumps out of the car, and I'm like, where is she going? And we're right at the steps of the art museum where the Rocky filmed, the Rocky Steps.
Oh, yeah.
She just runs up the steps. It's like 12. It's like 12 at night, and I just left the car right there. I run up the steps with her. We get to the top, and there was a homeless man, and he was playing the Rocky anthem, right? Like, it's this like the trumpet, right,
Yeah.
on the trumpet, and we're staring on the skyline of Philadelphia, a dad and his beautiful daughter, and yeah, and then we woke up the next morning, 8-hour drive back, but like that 48-hour period is like a memory that, man, it's just it was so powerful, and we can create more moments of that, right? We
Yeah.
can. It's the reason why they give us leave in the first place, and I had a boss of mine, use or lose leave,
Mm-hmm.
right? So so many of us leaders are guilty of. If you look at the use or lose tracker, like, as everybody as it resets on the fiscal years. For those of you who don't necessarily out there who don't know how this works, but as September ends and everything, you start tracking that, and it's traditionally all the leaders in the organization. So he looked around the table one time, he put in a staff meeting, and he said, "Hey, for all you people that use or lose out there, it says one of two things. It says, one, either you don't trust your people, or you suck at time management."
Wow. It's so
Right?
profound, right? Yeah.
Yeah, right. Like it's just truth.
It
You
is.
know what I mean? Like, there's no other reason for that. But those combined events, I try to, as much as I can, block them and put red lines up so that doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah. No, that's a great story, because I think as much as we want to give everything to our family. I think you're so right in that during our time of being driven and wanting to be successful and stuff, we think we're doing all the right things. We're thinking that by, working hard, and that means that that's how we're contributing to our family. That's probably the role model that was given to us that, even back in the day, you work out in the field, you provide for your family, you do all those different things. And so it's the same thing. And we forget along the way, like I shared with you a story, of my son-in-law. You forget along the way where they all of a sudden go, hey, it's just good to have you back. It's good to have you back in reality and being more of yourself and, checked in rather than checked out. And I had a point where almost similar. I had staff that was on the West Coast and I'm on the East Coast. And they would always have their phones nearby. I would too. And all of a sudden I'd see an email that would come across. It's 8:00 at night. Back then it was the BlackBerry. It had a little red light that would start blinking and let you know that, hey, you got a message here. So I'd pick it up because I saw the little red light, and it was, telling me that I needed to take an action. So it was training me along my journey. Yeah. And so I'd pick it up and I'd go, oh, okay, there's an email. I can answer that. Yes, do that. 10:00 tomorrow. We'll make a call, blah, blah, blah. Something really quick, set it down. And my wife would go, what did you just do? I go, I just answered an email real quick. And she goes, yeah, but why? I go, I don't know. It was, I saw I had an email.
Yeah, got to do it.
Yeah.
People are counting on me.
That's right. So the next day it kind of like hit me, and I go, you know what? In my staff call, I said, I don't care what time it is that you check out. I don't care if it's 6:00, 7:00, 8:00, 9:00. Set a time on your calendar where you're going to check out and be with your family. And you're not going to have your BlackBerry on. Put it in another room. And I started taking mine and leaving it in the kitchen so that I wouldn't even see it, right? Because I figured if I didn't see it, and I didn't get up, like when I went to get me a drink, I tried not to look at it. It was so tempting to see it sitting there and want to pick it up. And I started realizing that that helped me with my family. And I wanted to pass on that same thing to my subordinate leaders. And I also told them that if you see my email that comes across at 7:00, maybe I haven't checked out yet, but it doesn't mean you have to react. Mm-hmm. Don't think. So you're trying to really, as a leader, right? You're trying to create a culture that says that taking leave, taking vacation is okay. It's a right, not a privilege. So take advantage of it, because when you don't, it shows that you're not being an effective leader because you're not leading by example. Yep. And so I think that's where we're missing the boat, right? When we are too driven.
How much did they talk to you in the Army? How much did they teach this in your professional military education?
They didn't.
Yeah, right. Like I look back, I'm like, man, this is the stuff they should have been talking about.
Right.
Like, here's what you do. Like, when you come back from a deployment, you better just totally be in support mode, right? Like, you better not, like, you try to come back in and like, hey, when I left, this is like, you just need to shut up and figure out where you fit in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Same thing. Like the portion when you go home. Like another golden nugget that someone told me is a lot of times you leave work, the frenzy of work, and then maybe you just put on some music on the way home, and then when you walk in the door, you haven't necessarily transitioned your thoughts to your new role.
Yeah. Good point.
And so like I had this guy said one time, he's like, he just puts the car on total silence, and then he starts thinking about the most important job he has anyway. Right? Like what happened in my kids' lives that day? What's going on with my spouse? What do I need to? Do I need to talk to them about a big test they had? Do I need to talk to them about an event that's coming up, or a vacation that they're planning, whatever that is? Versus, oh God, let me tell you about this freaking crap that happened at work today. Like, your family don't want to hear that,
Yeah. Yeah.
But I wish they taught this stuff before you realize, from all the stumbling and mistakes.
Yeah. Totally.
Maybe you wouldn't listen anyway. I don't know.
Probably not, but you're absolutely correct. I mean, because we're establishing a culture whether we realize it or not. And that's kind of what we were talking about in the very beginning, that if you're so driven and you're not taking care of your people, they're going to recognize it and you're passing on a culture. If you're a person that's not taking vacation, they feel like if they don't do the same thing and they don't emulate you, that they're not an effective leader, or you're going to see them the same way. So there's a pattern here that's going on. And right now, during difficult times where people are working from home, I can tell you when I first transitioned from working from home, because I had staff in so many different locations after I got out of the military, it didn't make sense for me to go to an office somewhere, because most of my staff here in the Atlanta area, I didn't have any staff, I should say, in the Atlanta area. I had staff somewhere else. So I was just going to an office to be in office, and it just didn't make sense. It was not cost effective. So when I started working from home, the most challenging fact was that I had to check out, and you have the long ride. You appreciate it then, right? You appreciate that 30 minutes, that hour or whatever that you make the commute, because you have the ability to decompress and to walk in the door fresh. But when you work from home, you take that with you when you walk right out of your office, that bedroom you call an office, that room, and especially if your office space happens to be the kitchen table, the bar, right, and those types of things, because I ended up having, first I had an office and a bedroom that was right off the kitchen. That didn't work. So then I took it upstairs because I had an upstairs in the house, and that didn't work because it was still a place that it felt like house. But we finished the basement, a section of the basement, and when I did, I put my office down there, and the only time I went into that space was to work. Mm-hmm. So it never was a crossing time, it was a zone difference. But sometimes I felt like going out the back door, getting in my car, driving around the block, coming in the front door and go, "Hey, honey, I'm home," just to kind of, again, cut it off. And during these times, with the coronavirus and stuff like that, where a lot of staff are working from home, these can be very challenging times to be a parent with kids now going back to school. You're focusing on work. People tend to work longer hours when they work from home. They think it's going to be easier, but you tend to work longer because you can't disconnect. Yeah. It's really challenging as a leader. And to your point, this is the time where you have to speak up and go, "Hey guys, it's okay to chill out."
Yeah. Yeah, I think the first thing you have to do is just acknowledge it, right, and say it openly. Like that puts the team at peace a little bit too. Say, "Hey, I'm struggling with the same things as well."
Yeah,
I think we've even talked about, we had a key spouse meeting the other day, and I thought it was such a phenomenal point. We have one of the spouses on there. She has a master's in education, and she's got, I think, I want to say an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old. And for the first time ever, she's got to try to homeschool them, teach them at home, like that so many other families are facing. And she was sitting down with her kids and saying, "Hey, I actually have a degree in this. Like,
I'm not just a mom."
And the kids were like, "You're not a teacher, right?" Like, because like the roles, right? When you're away, there's a whole different mindset, and then who knows what they think work looks like at work, right?
Right.
But when it's at home, they're just like, "Oh, what are you doing down there? Are you just messing around?" They're like, "No, I'm actually working." Like it's, and right. It is just, it's so weird about all this time. But the main thing you do is just communicate and just have a discussion, and it's okay to say, "Hey, I'm struggling." It's okay to say, "Hey, I didn't get that done in the way that I wanted to," and I that's the biggest thing that I've been thinking about, is as schools try to open up and whatever that looks like, and as families try to adjust, and then as we move into the holidays, that there's just always kind of trying to be understanding of how does that impact our families, and how do you take away any layer of that stress that you can, and some of it is just make sure they don't handle it alone, right? So that's shared across the community, so they can lift each other up. They had actually an interesting idea about like switching kids in other homes. Do you have kids yourself?
Yes, two.
Yeah, right. Like you said, so I don't know how many times you would tell your child one thing, and then when they heard a neighbor say it, they were like, "Oh, that was brilliant!" Like that was, And I think the same thing holds true. Like you could just move kids, because those roles, like teacher, coach, parent, they're different, and it's really tough to play those. You can't like flip a switch, especially when you're dealing with children.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's better to have them hear it from somebody else.
Well, that's what brings back to the point you had a few minutes ago about deployments and stuff like that, walking back in the door and understanding what your role is. I think too, if you're listening to this and whether you just came back from a deployment or not, if you listen and really pay attention and open your eyes and ears when you walk back into the house every day after work and take note of what's going on, is how much are you a part of what's happening right there? Yeah. And you're gonna know it, because either they're engaging you in the conversation, or they're just seeing you sitting there and you're not part of it. So then you got to think, all right, I need to insert myself into that situation as much as I can to talk about, to my kid, he was talking about a difficult day, maybe at school, or something that happened or something like that on the field, and baseball, football, whatever sport they're playing. Well, then how much am I engaging in that conversation, or is it just my wife? Is it just my spouse? And so it's the same thing when you come back from deployment. Usually the best thing to do is shut up for a little bit of time, because you can't insert yourself and be the father role once again. You weren't the father role for 6 months, or 8.
And as painful as it is, that's just the truth.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean they don't want you in that role, but you just got to realize that those duties were shifted elsewhere.
Yep.
And you got to kind of almost ask for permission at times to, hey, can I help with this? Hey, can I, you know what I mean?
Yeah. But maybe you need to start doing that anyway, right? Because maybe it is that you're not in deployment, but you just have been checked out so much that role is shifted to the other spouse, and you've got to recognize that and start slowly inserting yourself into the role that you are, which is the father.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because they had their own battle to fight, right? Like they, and it is kind of the same principles, right? You have to just kind of realize that they were given the task. It's like a commander, right? They were given so much resources. They had an objective and they had to move out. And you definitely don't want to come in and start playing armchair quarterback, with how they fought the battle at home. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, certainly not. I remember, what was it? When I came back from Korea, I was gone for a year. And that was actually part of the hardest time on our marriage. Was I was in Korea for a year, and then came back. We went to Germany, and I remember on the plane ride going across the Atlantic, like the kids were. I mean, they were pretty young, and they were like making a bunch of noise, and it was on the plane, and everybody's looking at us, and my wife is like passed out sleeping, right? Like good sleep, and I was like, hey, honey, the kids are crying, and remember she just looked up at me and she was like, welcome home, right? Like it was like,
yeah, totally.
Welcome home, right? Like she just went right back to sleep, right?
Yeah. And what do you want me to do?
Yeah. What do you want me to do? Right? Like, yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. Got it.
Yeah.
But when we got over to Germany, 4 months later, I deployed for 7 months, and that was that. So you're given out of 24 months, I was gone for 19. That second time gone, that was the hardest. That absolutely was. And but I think you're right. Is you have to recognize, like, you don't wear those stripes walking in the door. Like, you don't, because everybody at work will, like, oh, whatever you say, whatever and you can fool yourself, in such a major way that really sets everything up for failure. I think the point you talk about the cell phone and if you pause and realize how much are you really part of what's going on. What's interesting is your kids, like it's funny, like we have puppies right now, and they're about a year and a half old. When I come home, it like reminds me when my kids were young. Like I'm the most important thing in the world to those puppies, and it used to be that way to my kids. But as they get older, your kids will realize when you come home, do they feel the most important thing to you? And especially if this is, you pick this up and they're trying to talk to you, and you're like, hey, just a minute, hey, something came up, hey, this and that. They will go find other things to do.
Yeah.
And then when you want to go connect with them, then you get all upset because you're like, hey, I wanted to.
Yeah.
So you just
put the phone down here. Let's talk.
Yeah. Put the phone down. Oh, well, Dad, what about you? You know what I mean? Right. And in your mind, you try to fool yourself. Well, I was doing work stuff, right? Like that's more important than you playing, whatever.
Yeah.
But it's not. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
Okay? Right. You're home. So I think that you got to kind of take your bumps. It's maybe not how you like it, but just work your way through that and just continue to make them the most important thing.
Isn't that also a little bit going back to what your boss that you mentioned in one of the meetings talked about is time management? Because what we're really talking about here is creating the right culture, and removing those things that are not necessarily healthy, like, driven is okay in moderation, everything's good in some sense of moderation, but when it comes to time management, it's really making sure that you're giving the right time to work, your right time to the family, the right time to yourself, your own time. You need to have that moment where you read a book or you meditate or you just kind of check out. And so your kids need their space and their time to do that. Your spouse does as well. And it's understanding what everybody's role is in this whole thing, what everybody's time and space is. But also, I think the time management is so critical because, if you're an individual that still is working 7, 8, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night, I'm going to tell you right now, you're on the wrong path. You're thinking you're working hard. You're thinking that you're making, your bosses.
No, where you're headed is not what you.
No,
what you think is at the end of that rainbow is not what you.
It's not. It's not. Yeah. Yep. And people will say, yeah, but I'm in the military. I don't have the luxury of being able to decide when my time is appropriate. Yeah, sure. There's going to be situations that you're absolutely right. The command is going to dictate those.
Yeah,
hours.
you and I are not talking about a one-time night.
Yeah.
That's not what we're talking about.
Yeah. So I mean, that's the whole thing is that they use that as an excuse. Oh well, I've got an important job here. I mean, it's different. I'm in the soft community, or no, it's all the same. It doesn't really matter what your job, your MOS is. You do have some control, but the thing is, no matter what control that you do have, how much of that are you taking advantage in the right place? So, when
your family knows the difference.
Oh, absolutely.
They absolutely know the difference.
Yep.
And if you would pause and think about it, you do too.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
But that's painful.
But it's painful to face. Yeah, it is. Because you'll try to justify. You'll start this two things in your shoulders, right? Like this one side is telling you, oh, but you're doing it for your country. Oh, but there's people counting on you, right? But
you're important. Yeah,
you're important. But as much as I do that seat we sit in, that position we occupy, we hand that baton off to somebody else. It's temporary.
Yeah.
And then what are you going to have left over? You're only going to have those relationships. And if you haven't nurtured them, they're probably not going to be where you want them to be.
Wait, so are you saying, Blaze, that everything is not going to fail when I walk out the door? It's not going to, when I change commands and PCS.
As important as we think we are.
Yeah. But it's so true.
It is the beautiful design of the system, though.
It is. Yeah. But it's one of those things that the culture of that obviously still sticks around within the military today because it's been bred and passed on. So in most cases, people who are becoming leaders want to follow or emulate somebody that had trained them. And so maybe good or bad, that's their role model that they're going to use. So if you've set the wrong example, unfortunately, you've now planted a seed in subordinates that are going to probably end up using that same style of leadership as they move forward.
Yeah, but Robert, I think that's the good thing that's happening now is, even this, right? This form that now you can have where people have visibility and can see the more human side of people because I remember I used to look up and be like, oh, you got to be perfect. Oh, you gotta. That's what it takes. You got to work all those long hours. And now I think there's just a greater opportunity for people to even talk about their struggles, their failures, for families to share things with people who are younger or earlier in their journey because of the media and the platforms that we have out there. That's what does excite me is there's an opportunity, and even now with COVID, I mean, there's webcasts and stuff all over the place. So you necessarily don't have to wait for your own terrible experience. You can kind of learn from someone else, and that's why people take in books, right, to learn lessons from people in the past. So that's what kind of does excite me a little bit. And we are talking about this very topic a lot more. We are talking about there's a big difference in productivity and someone just who's working the longest day.
Oh,
right.
Yes.
It used to be we would measure that person working 12 hours a day or 16 hours a day. Those are the real
hard charger
ones.
Yep.
Hard chargers.
Yep.
No, but on Monday, all they do is talk about fantasy football. Those people, and then they wouldn't even start working until later on at night.
Right.
They would just walk around. And then there's other people that just get in and make it happen. Make time count. But we're having these conversations, I think, a lot more openly and a lot more on a flat level. And I think that's only gonna help.
But you, getting your Lean and Six Sigma training through the Air Force, I think it probably helped you from a metric standpoint to evaluate productivity, whereas some of the general leaders may not evaluate it the same way because all they can do is focus on how much time people are actually contributing to whatever the mission is.
It was their only key performance.
It was one metric, right? Time.
It was one metric,
yeah. And so now, though, your eyes are open, because as you start, as you mentioned, getting some additional training, and in your case and mine, it was Lean Six Sigma. It could be just reading a book or something like that. You begin to pick up a different set of tools where you can measure people differently, and you understand that time is only one data point, one data set. So what else are you doing? How are you attacking the issues that are coming your way? Are you allowing time to dictate that, or are you really managing through it? Are you delegating? Are you doing, and so that's where you're talking about, you're really trying to shape the entire leader. You're trying to mold that individual to understanding all the pieces that come into what a good leader really is, which is great. I think it needs to be more in the military than what it certainly was in the past, because we didn't have that good role model. And it wasn't that I didn't have good role models. I think it was just people who were leading based on the example of what they were taught, and there were some great traits and great things that I took away from some of those leaders that during that time frame. But I learned a whole lot by just observing and seeing that those weren't the best ways to lead as well.
Yeah. I think it felt always leadership by force, by power, versus intrinsically trying to motivate somebody or build a connection with them. And that's another thing I think too is, accountability is a lot higher now too. So you didn't have access to kind of see or report or even fact check somebody like you can now. I know for a second, I have a conversation with somebody, they're going on the internet 2 seconds later to see if what I said was right. Right?
Yeah, it's true.
It used to be just like, do it because I told you to do, or that was what the sergeant major said, right? Or the chief said it must be right. So you kind of, it's good for you as well. But I think, to your point, it's leadership has evolved also. The world has evolved. And I think is that you have to make sure too, in the concept of being driven, if you're driven to help and serve others, then you'll head where you need to. If you're driven to, hey, this is what I do, this is how I operate, and if you don't get on, like,
you got to get on board. Yeah, you're right.
If you don't get on board, that we're gonna have issues, right? Then that's you're probably driving in a direction where you might not like.
Yeah. No, and it's not just
or it'll catch up with you.
Well, I was going to say it's not just there. Yeah. It'll also be in the household too, because you may be doing that same thing when you walk in the door and you feel like that's the attitude. Hey, I'm the father figure when I walk in the door. This is my job. And if you don't get on board with it, you get out of my house, type of thing. It's that kind of approach. So, however we're leading or however we're adjusting and stuff here, I think, being driven, again, within moderation, there's nothing wrong with it. Each and every person, you want to have people on your team that really are driven, who want to be the best at whatever they can be. There's no doubt about it. That's the kind of individual. But at the same token, you want them to understand that it's not the end all be all, that there's more to life here. And not only that, but if you're in a senior leader role, you're actually having the opportunity to cast a shadow with the individuals that you're leading. And what kind of shadow are you casting? Are you making a great impression? Are you leading them with tools and with things that then, as a mentor, that they can take, or a coach, that they can take on and use in their own leadership, and through their own teams and stuff? And so those little lessons and those times where you have a leader that sits there and says, hey, how many of my leaders here actually have use or lose situations? Hey, how many of you have 400 emails right now in your inbox and you complain you can't control your day? Yeah. What we're talking here is time management. You got a time management problem. Yeah,
big time. And I there's so much from that. I think, even our analogy, we're talking about getting to the top of the mountain, really like the thing you're driven for, it should be team success. And, my current boss, he talks about the rocking chair test, right? So you're in a rocking chair, and your grandkids run up in your lap. What will you tell them about? I think what you want to tell them about is, when you look at all the people you work with, it would feel much better if you could look around and all of them reached higher, went higher than you did, right? If you could look around at whatever perch you were on or whatever place you got to, if you could look all around and all the people that you were charged to supervise, if they reached a higher destination than you did, versus the other way around, right? Like, I think that's important too. And I going back to kind of the driven part, one thing I'm extremely thankful for is, my grandfather was driven, He was driven by pain that he couldn't handle. He lost his twin sister and his best friend in a car accident. He walked away, and they were killed inside the car. And that was when he was in his young 20s. My grandma said he was never the same after that. I think he was driven by that. I think he was driven by when he was in the Marine Corps, and most of his platoon all went to Korea, and many of them didn't come back. And I think he was driven by guilt because he got injured in basic training, basically, or in training. He was driven by that guilt, and he lost a lot of it in the bottle. But I am really, really thankful, though, is he was always a good man inside of there that I also got to see. Mm-hmm. And then my grandma, she taught me how to, I think I didn't realize it at the time, but she was always so loving. Right. So the counterbalance to that I'm extremely thankful for is she showed me like that love is really the biggest bond and the biggest thing that you can do. Because if you're disconnected or you're just uncompassionate to another human being, then things can really get sideways. And I, when I reflect on it, I look at those two kind of forces. And that is, you are a reflection of those who I think, especially earlier on, who mold you. And I look at that, and that's pretty important. And you talk about time. The most important thing is to don't count time, make time count, right? Like whatever moment you have. And I've been telling people too, this is kind of the Kobe Bryant lesson from this year. People thought Kobe was going to be around for a lot longer. And he was big on that too. If you even look at, he changed his number to 24 because he believed in that too. He was the first guy up in the morning. He was always working on basics. And I think that's the biggest thing we all can kind of look at is, and you talked about it earlier, is, don't be so worried about the opposite ends. Just focus on the moment you're in and being present that moment, whoever might be in front of you or around you. I think be driven for that. I think that's something we can all try to inspire to keep focusing on.
Blaze, thanks for coming on the show. Really appreciate you coming on and sharing your story, because I think this is an important topic, whether you're a leader or just an individual that's going through life on a daily basis. There's so many lessons that we've talked about here, and sometimes, like we talked about, you don't realize it until you're our age and you start looking back and going, oh, crap, man, I wish I would have listened to somebody who was saying that. So listen to it, pay attention to it, and I appreciate you coming on and saying it.
Yeah, Robert, it's a pleasure again. And I don't know if you heard this quote from Jim Carrey. It was pretty good. Jim Carrey's been pretty successful, and he said, "Hey, I wish everybody in the world had a chance to, have all the money they ever dreamed of, the biggest house they ever could have all the wealth, and then only to realize none of that mattered in the first place."
Wow.
I mean, yeah, I just heard that. I heard just for last week, but hey, thanks again, man. This has been great to connect with you, and like you said, I hope somebody gets something out of it.